I'm Ash, and I don't know how much time I have left. I haven't slept for days, and I feel like my life's in danger. It's only up till now I've finally gotten around to writing this. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I know that a lot of people out there aren't going to believe me about this, but everything I tell you is the truth. A few days ago, I read a story written by the Lost Narrator, and I haven't felt the same since. I'd just gotten off work and was ready to head home for the night when I suddenly got hungry and went out to get a bite to eat. I stopped by a local cafe where I just ordered a small coffee and a salad. Bad combination, I guess. As I sat outside and ate my so-called dinner, I saw a strange mare walking up the street. I couldn't see her face since she was wearing a hood and her long red mane covered the rest of her face. I tried my best not to look directly at her and risk accidentally pissing her off. She already looked like she was in a bad mood. As she moved closer, I smelled something horrible. It smelled like rotting flesh that had been sitting in a cold, wet cave for over 2 years, maybe more. She was wearing a long cloak, too. It was all tattered and wore a whole bunch of patches all over it. What intrigued me the most was her horn. It looked like it had been decaying from the inside out. I've heard cases like it, but nothing like that's happened in over a very, very long time. As she walked by, the smell got worse and worse, and I tried my best not to puke. As she walked by, I didn't shoot a single glance at her, but then I heard a small sound. It sounded like paper hitting the ground. As I turned around, it turns out my suspicions were correct. Whoever that mare was, she dropped a piece of paper on the ground. It looked like it had been some kind of story, or at least a piece of one. I didn't know really what it was when I first saw it, and as much as I hated to do it, I felt like I had to give her that paper back. I picked it up where she had dropped it, and then looked in the direction where she was walking, and was baffled. She was gone. Confused, I didn't know what to do with the paper, thinking that she wasn't going to come back to reclaim it, as because she had a whole backpack full of papers. I decided to just take it home and probably just throw it away. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was already raining and well past midnight. As I walked into the kitchen to throw the paper away, some writing on it caught my eye. The story was written by the Lost Narrator. I'd heard of her before. She once told me stories, and a bunch of other fools too. We all used to sit at the library, and she'd read to us. But that was many, many years ago, and she went missing along with her beloved. Curiosity immediately struck my mind, as because the paper was so short, and her stories tended to be more on the longer side. Maybe it was a story that she had once been writing, but then after she disappeared, she couldn't finish it. There was a whole bunch of theories I could have conjured up, but at this point all I wanted to do was read what she had written. I sat on the couch and read the title to myself. Bad Ponies Never Steal, by the Lost Narrator. There once was a little foal named Oakleaf. He had always been the good pony. He obeyed his parents, always finished his dinner, got good grades, and could never hurt a fly. But, as all parents know, children always make mistakes, some worse than others. Oakleaf had never made mistakes. He was definitely the mama's boy in school, but luckily he did have plenty of friends who cheered him up after he was always being teased by the older ponies. But even the very, very good boys still have a few flaws in them. Oakleaf's parents had always trusted him to go out on his own. One night, he had been hanging out with his friends in the park. They were playing a game of kickball when it started getting late. Oakleaf left the park at around 8 and began his walk home. As he stood at the stoplight, waiting for the light to change, an older stallion stood next to him, waiting to cross too. As they stood there, Oakleaf saw something in the older stallion's backpack. It was a piece of paper with some very colorful writing on it. Oakleaf looked curious, and he quietly pulled the paper out of the stallion's bag. Then suddenly the light changed colors, and they both walked across the street, Oakleaf hiding the paper on his side. As they went their separate ways, Oakleaf walked up the stoop to his house when suddenly something struck him on the back. It was the older stallion. He had lightly slapped Oakleaf on the back and asked him, "Why did you take my paper?" Oakleaf looked at the ground and handed him the paper back. He told him he was sorry. The older stallion looked at the paper and then put it back in his saddlebag, and then looked at Oakleaf again. "Thank you for being honest and returning the paper. You're a good boy." With that being said, he walked back down the step and walked away, waving to Oakleaf as he headed out. Oakleaf smiled and walked back into the house, where he saw his mom making dinner and his dad sitting on the couch. Oakleaf put his bag on the ground as the bells rang. And that was all that was written on the page. I folded the paper up and put it in the drawer right outside of my recording office. A little upset that I never got to finish reading the story, I turned on my tablet and began to draw some comics. As I opened my browser to play some music, I saw a news article that was in my recommended list. It was an article describing what happened to the Lost Narrator and her beloved. The news article was very poorly written, with a lot of spelling and grammar errors. It also didn't state many facts, and with the very few it did, they were stuff that I already knew. It didn't really even give me the answer of what happened to them. It just left me with more questions. As I continued drawing, a very important memory came floating back to my mind. I can remember myself sitting on the carpet in the library, listening to the Lost Narrator finish up one of her stories. Her stories always had an overarching meaning, and as she would say, they always had a moral. Some kind of lesson that each of the stories would always leave with the reader. Thinking back, the moral of the story that I had just read basically sounded like stealing was bad, but I couldn't really pinpoint what it was, because I never finished reading the story. All the other pages were still missing. Suddenly, another bolt of curiosity struck my mind. I reopened my browser and began doing research on what happened to the Lost Narrator and her beloved. I was probably on the computer for about 2 hours, my anxiety getting heavier and heavier with each article that I read. I had found out that the Lost Narrator's beloved was named Magpie Pony, and every single article that I read never really told me what happened to her. I'd also found out that the Lost Narrator, well, after losing her beloved, she spiraled off into some deep depression, but also realized that with every story that she told, it sounded like some kind of moral of each story came true and affected one of her listeners. Then she suddenly disappeared out of nowhere. I assumed that she had probably gone off to find out more about this intriguing power that she had, or maybe she went to go look for her beloved. I honestly can't remember. But there was this one final article that really pushed me over the limit. It was a news article written by an older stallion. In the article, it stated that his wife had, drowned her foal in the bathtub. When I saw the picture of the foal, my heart dropped. I recognized that foal. He was the same foal who sat next to me had sat next to me in the library when the Lost Narrator read her final story to us. I remember she said that you better watch your mouth, kid, or your mom might take some soap and wash it out. Or at least that's all I can remember her saying. It was probably along the lines of that. And then later that night, the mother did drown her full in the bathtub. I think that might have been some kind of moral of some story, which I don't remember. I honestly can't remember much from that day. I'd never felt worse in my life. I immediately shut my browser off and turned my tablet off and began thinking to myself, that story that I read, no, it couldn't. It couldn't be real. I didn't even read the whole story. There's gotta be some kind of other meaning. And that leads me up until now. I've been doing more and more research every day, still coming up clueless. That story is still sitting in my drawer right outside of my office. I haven't touched it since. That leads me up until now, finishing up this story. I guess I'll update if I find anything. Until then, I've gotta go. I still don't feel safe, even in my own house. After hearing that story from the Lost Narrator, I'm definitely keeping an eye open for who knows what could be out there. Who knows? She's probably telling a story to someone right now.